Today I'm reading from On the Shortness of Life by Seneca. I'm reading after a break of some time, so I'll try to catch up. What I'm saying applies to people who are imperfect, commonplace and unsound. Not to the wise man. He does not have to walk nervously or cautiously, for he has such self-confidence that he does not hesitate to make a stand against fortune, and will never give ground to her. He has no reason to fear her, since he regards as held on sufferance not only his goods and possessions and status, but even his body, his eyes and hand, and all that makes life more dear, and his very self, and he lives as though he were lent to himself and bound to return the loan on demand without complaint. Nor is he thereby cheap in his own eyes, because he knows he is not his own, but he will act in all things as carefully and meticulously as a devout and holy man guards anything entrusted to him. And whenever he is ordered to repay his debt, he will not complain to fortune, but he will say, I thank you for what I have possessed and held. I have looked after your property to my great benefit, but at your command I give and yield it with gratitude and goodwill. If you want me still to have anything of yours, I shall keep it safe. If you wish otherwise, I give back and restore to you my silver, both coined and plate, my house and my household. Should nature demand back what she previously entrusted us, we shall say to her too, take back my spirit in better shape than when you gave it. I do not quibble or hang back. I am willing for you to have straightway what you gave me before I was conscious. Take it. What is the harm in returning to the point whence you came? He will live badly who does not know how to die well. So we must first strip off the value we set on this thing and reckon the breath of life as something cheap. To quote Cicero, we hate gladiators if they are keen to save their life by any means. We favor them if they openly show contempt for it. You must realize that the same thing applies to us, for often the cause of dying is the fear of it. Dame Fortune, who makes sport with us, says, why should I preserve you, base and fearful creature? You will only receive more severe wounds and stabs, as you don't know how to offer your throat. But you will both live longer and die more easily, since you receive the blade bravely, without withdrawing your neck and putting your hands in the way. He who fears death will never do anything worthy of a living man. But he who knows that this was the condition laid down for him at the moment of his conception will live on those terms. And at the same time he will guarantee with a similar strength of mind that no events take him by surprise. For by foreseeing anything that can happen as though it will happen, he will soften the onslaught of all his troubles, which present no surprises to those who are ready and waiting for them, but fall heavily on those who are careless in the expectation that all will be well. There is disease, imprisonment, disaster, fire. None of these is as unexpected. I did know in what riotous company nature had enclosed me. So many times have the dead been lamented in my neighborhood. So many times have torch and taper conducted untimely funerals past my threshold. Often has the crash of falling building echoed inside me. Many who were linked to me through the forum and the senate and everyday conversation have been carried off in a night, which has severed the hands once joined in friendship. Should it surprise me if the perils which have always roamed around me should some day reach me? A great number of people plan a sea voyage with no thought of a storm. I shall never be ashamed to go to a bad author for a good quotation. Whenever Publilius abandoned the absurdities of the mime and language aimed at the gallery, he showed more force of intellect than the writers of tragedy and comedy, and he produced many thoughts more striking than those of tragedy, let alone farce, including this one. What can happen to one can happen to all. If you let this idea sink into your vitals and regard all the ills of other people of which every day shows an enormous supply, as having a clear path to you too. You will be armed long before you're attacked. It is too late for the mind to equip itself to endure dangers once they are already there. I didn't think it would happen, and would you ever have believed it would turn out so? Why ever not? Are there any riches which are not pursued by poverty and hunger and beggary? What rank is there whose people robe and augur's staff and patrician shoe straps are not attended by squalor, and the brand of disgrace and 1,000 marks of shame and utter contempt? What kingship does not face ruin and trampling down, the tyrant and the hangman? And these things are not separated by wide intervals. There is only a brief hour between sitting on a throne and kneeling to another. Know then that every condition can change, and whatever happens to anyone can happen to you too. You are rich, but are you richer than Pompey? Yet even he lacked bread and water when Gaius, his old relation and new host, had opened the house of Caesar to him so that he could close his own. Though he possessed so many rivers flowing from source to mouth in his own lands, he had to beg for drops of water. He died of hunger and thirst in a kinsman's palace, and while he served his heir, was organizing a state funeral for him. You have filled the highest offices, were they as high or unexpected or all-embracing as Sejanus had. Yet on the same day the Senate escorted him to prison, and the people tore him to pieces, and there was nothing left for the executioner to drag away of the man who had had everything heaped on him that gods and men could offer. You are a king. I shall not direct you to Croesus, who lived to see his own funeral pyre both lit and extinguished, thus surviving not only his kingdom but his own death, nor to Jugurtha, who was put on to show to the Roman people within a year of causing them terror. We have seen Ptolemy, king of Africa, and Mithridates, king of Armenia, imprisoned by Gaius. One of them was sent into exile, and the other hoped to be sent there in better faith. In all this topsy-turvy succession of events, unless you regard anything that can happen as bound to happen, you give adversity a power over you, which the man who sees it first can crush. The next thing to ensure is that we do not waste our energies pointlessly or in pointless activities. That is not to long either for what we cannot achieve, or for what once gained only makes us realize too late and after much exertion the futility of our desires. In other words, let our labor not be in vain and without result, nor the result unworthy of our labor. For usually bitterness follows if either we do not succeed or we are ashamed of succeeding. We must cut down on all this dashing about that great many people indulge in. As they throng around houses and theatres and fora, they intrude into other people's affairs, always giving the impression of being busy. If you ask one of them, as he comes out of a house, "Where are you going? What do you have in mind?" he will reply, "I really don't know, but I'll see some people, I'll do something." They wander around aimlessly looking for employment, and they do not what they intended, but they happen to run across. Their roaming is idle and pointless, like ants crawling over the bushes, which purposelessly make their way right up to the topmost branch and then all the way down again. Many people live a life like these creatures, and you could not unjustly call it busy idleness. You will feel sorry for some folk you see rushing along, as if to a fire. So often do they dump headlong into those in their way and send themselves and others sprawling, when all the time they have been running to call on someone who will not return the call, or to attend a funeral of somebody they don't know, or the trial of somebody who is constantly involved in litigation, or the betrothal of a woman who is constantly getting married and while attending a litter have on occasion even carried it. They even return home, worn out or to no purpose, swearing they themselves don't know why they went out or where they have been, and the next day they will wander forth on the same old round. So let all your activity be redirected to some object, let it have some end in view. It is not industry that makes men restless, but false impressions of things drive them mad. for even madmen need some hope to style them. The outward show of some object excites them because their deluded mind cannot detect its worthlessness. In the same way, every individual among those who wander forth to swell a crowd is led round in the city by empty and trivial reasons. Dawn drives him forth with nothing to do, and after he has been jostled in vain on many men's doorsteps, and only succeeds in greeting their slave announcers. Shut out by many, he finds no one at home and with more difficulty than himself. This evil leads him, in turn, to that most disgraceful vice of eavesdropping and prying into public and secret things and learning about many matters which are safe neither to talk about nor to listen to. I imagine that Democritus had this in mind when he began. Anyone who wishes to live a quiet life should not engage in many activities either privately or publicly. Meaning, of course, useless ones. For if they are essential, then not just many, but countless things have to be done both privately and publicly. But when no binding duty summons us, we must restrain our actions. For a man who is occupied with many things often puts himself into the power of fortune, whereas the safest policy is rarely to tempt her, though to keep her always in mind and to trust her in nothing. Thus, I shall sail unless something happens, and I shall become praetor unless something prevents me, and my business will be successful unless something interferes. That is why we say that nothing happens to the wise man against his expectation. We remove him from the chances that befall mankind, but from their mistakes, not do all things turn out for him as he wished but as he reckoned. And above all, he reckoned that something could block his plans. But inevitably, the mind can cope more easily with the distress arising from disappointed longings if you had not promised it certain success. We should also make ourselves flexible so that we do not pin our hopes too much on our set plans and can move over to those things to which chance has brought us, without dreading a change in either our purpose or our condition, provided that fickleness, that fault most inimical to tranquillity, does not get hold of us. For obstinacy, from which fortune often extorts something, is bound to bring wretchedness and anxiety, and much more serious is the fickleness that nowhere restrains itself. Both are hostile to tranquillity and find change impossible and endurance impossible. In any case, the mind must be recalled from external objects into itself. It must trust itself in itself, rejoice in itself, admire its own things. It must withdraw as much as possible from the affairs of others and devote its attention to itself. It must not feel losses and should take a kindly view even of misfortunes. When a shipwreck was reported and he heard that all his possessions had sunk, our founder Zeno said, "Fortune bids me a less encumbered philosopher." When a tyrant threatened to kill the philosopher Theodorus, and indeed to leave him unburied, he replied, "You can please yourself, and my half-pint of blood is in your power. But as to burial, you are a fool if you think it matters to me whether I rot above or below ground." Julius Canus, an outstanding fine man, whom we can admire even though he was born in our age, had a long dispute with Gaius, and as he was going away, that Phalaris said to him, "In case you are deluding yourself with foolish hopes, I have ordered you to be led off to execution." His reply was, "I thank you, noble emperor. I am not certain what he meant, for many possibilities occur to me. Did he mean to be insulting by showing the extent of the cruelty which caused death to be a blessing? Was it taunting him with his daily bouts of madness? For people used to thank him whose children had been murdered and whose property had been confiscated. Was he accepting his sentence as a welcome release? Whatever he meant, it was a spirited reply. Someone will say, after this, Gaius could have ordered him to live. Canis was not afraid of that. Gaius was known to keep his word in commands of that sort. Will you believe that Canis spent the 10 days leading up to his execution without any anxiety at all? It is incredible what the man has said. what he did, how calm he remained. He was playing draughts when the centurion, who was dragging off a troop of condemned men, ordered him to be summoned too. At the call, he counted his pieces and said to his companion, "See that you don't falsely claim after my death that you won." Then nodding to the centurion, he said, "You will be witness that I am leading by one piece." Do you think Canis was just enjoying his game at that board? He was enjoying his irony. His friends were sorrowful at the prospect of losing such a man, and he said to them, "Why are you sad? You are wondering whether souls are immortal. I shall soon know." He did not cease searching for the truth right up to the end and making his own death a topic for discussion. His philosophy teacher went with him, and when they were not far from the mound on which our god Caesar received his daily offering, he said, "Canis, what are you thinking about now? What is your state of mind?" Canis replied, "I have decided to take note whether in that most fleeting moment the spirit is aware of his departure from the body." And he promised that if he discovered anything, he would visit his friends in turn and reveal to them the state of the soul. Just look at that serenity in the midst of a hurricane and the spirit worthy of immortality, which invokes its own fate to establish the truth, and in that very last phase of life questions the departing soul and seeks to learn something not only up to the time of death, but from the very experience of death itself. No one ever pursued philosophy longer. So great a man will not quickly be relinquished, and he should be referred to with respect, glorious spirit, who swelled the roll of gayest victims. We shall ensure your immortality. But there is no point in banishing the cause of private sorrow, for sometimes we are gripped by a hatred of the human race. When you consider how rare is simplicity and how unknown is innocence, how you scarcely ever find loyalty except when it is expedient, what a host of successful crimes you come across, and all the things equally hateful that men gain and lose through trust, and how ambition is now so far from setting limits to itself that it acquires a lustre from viciousness. All this drives the mind into a darkness whose shadows overwhelm it, as though those virtues were overturned which it is not possible to hope for and not useful to possess. We must therefore school ourselves to regard all commonly held vices as not hateful but ridiculous, and we should imitate Democritus rather than Heraclitus. For whenever these went out in public, the latter used to weep and the former to laugh. The latter thought all our activities sorrows, the former follies, so we should make light of all things and endure them with tolerance. It is more civilized to make fun of life than to bewail it. Bear in mind, too, that he deserves better of the human race, as well as who laughs at it when he who grieves over it, since the one allows it a fair prospect of hope, while the other stupidly laments over things he cannot hope will be put to right. And all things considered, it is the mark of a greater mind not to restrain laughter than not to restrain tears, since laughter expresses the gentlest of our feelings and reckons that nothing is great or serious or even wretched in all the trappings of our existence. Let every man contemplate the individual occurrences which bring us joy or grief, and he will learn the truth of Bion's dictum, that all the activities of men and like their beginnings and their life is not more high-souled or serious than their conception, and that being born from nothing they are reduced to nothing. Yet it is preferable to accept calmly public behavior and human fallings, and not to collapse into either laughter or tears, for to be tormented by other people's troubles means perpetual misery, while to take delight in them in an inhuman pleasure, just as it is an empty show of kindness to weep and assume a solemn look, because somebody is burying a son. In your own troubles too, the appropriate conduct is to indulge as much grief as nature, not custom demands, for many people weep in order to be seen weeping. Enough their eyes are dry, as long as there is nobody looking. since they regard it as bad from not to weep when everyone is weeping. This evil of taking our cue from others has become so deeply ingrained that even the most basic feeling, grief, degenerates into imitation. We must next look at a category of occurrences which with good reason causes grief and anxiety. When good men come to a bad end, when Socrates is compelled to die in prison, and Rutilius to live in exile, when Pompey and Cicero have to offer their necks to their clients, and Cato, that living pattern of the virtues, has to fall on his sword to show the world what is happening to himself, that the state at the same time, when we have to feel anguish that fortune hands out such unfair rewards, and what can each of us then hope for himself when he sees the best men suffering the worst fates? What follows then? Observe how each of those men bore his fate, and if they were brave, long with your spirit for a spirit like theirs. If they died with womanly cowardice, then nothing died with them. Either they are worthy of your admiration for their courage or unworthy of your longing for their cowardice. For what is more disgraceful than if supremely great men, by dying bravely, make others fearful? Let us repeatedly praise one who deserves praise, and let us say, the braver one is, the happier he is. You have escaped all mischances, envy and disease. You have come forth from prison. Not that you seemed to the gods worthy of ill fortune, but unworthy that fortune should any longer have power over you. But we have to lay hands on those who pull back, and at the very point of death look back towards life. I shall weep for no one who is happy, and for no one who is weeping. The one has himself wiped away my tears, the other by his own tears has proved himself unworthy of any. Should I keep for Hercules because he was burned alive, or Regulus because he was pierced by all those nails, or Cato because he wounded his own wounds? All of them, by giving up a brief spell of time, found the way to become eternal, and by dying achieved immortality. There is also another not inconsiderable source of anxieties. If you are too concerned to assume a pose and do not reveal yourself openly to anyone, like many people whose lives are false and aimed only at outward show, for it is agonizing always to be watching yourself in fear of being caught when your usual mask has slipped. Nor can we ever be carefree when we think that whenever we are observed we are appraised, for many things happen to strip us of our pretensions against our will, and even if all this attention to oneself succeeds, yet the life of those who always live behind a mask is not pleasant or free from care. On the contrary, how full pleasure is that honest and naturally unadorned simplicity that in no way hides its disposition. Yet this life too runs the risk of being scorned if everything is revealed to everybody. For with some people familiarity breeds contempt, but there is no danger of virtue being held cheap as a result of close observation. But it is better to be despised for simplicity than to suffer agonies from everlasting pretense. Still, let us use moderation here. There is a big difference between living simply and living carelessly. We should also withdraw a lot into ourselves, for associating with people unlike ourselves upsets a calm disposition, stirs up passions again, and aggravates any mental weakness which has not been completely cured. However, the two things must be mingled and varied, solitude and joining a crowd. The one will make us long for people, and the other for ourselves, and each will be a remedy for the other. Solitude will cure our distaste for a crowd, and the crowd will cure our boredom with solitude. The mind should not be kept continuously at the same pitch of concentration. But given amusing diversions, Socrates did not blush to play with small children. Cato smoothed his mind with wine when it was tired from the cares of state, and Scipio used to disport that triumphal and military form in the dance, not shuffling about delicately in the present style, when even in walking men mince and wriggle with more than effeminate voluptuousness, but in the old-fashioned manly style in which men danced at times of games and festivals without loss of dignity, even if their enemies were watching them. Our minds must relax, they will rise better and keener after a rest, just as you must not force fertile farmland, as uninterrupted productivity will soon exhaust it, so constant effort will sap our mental vigor. While a short period of rest and relaxation will restore our powers, unremitting effort leads to a kind of mental dullness and lethargy. Nor would men's wishes move so much in the direction if sport and play did not involve a sort of natural pleasure, though repeated indulgence in these will destroy all the gravity and force of our minds. After all, sleep too is essential as restorative, but if you prolong it constantly day and night, it will be death. There is a big difference between slackening your hold on something and severing the link. Lawgivers established holidays to give people a public mandate to enjoy themselves, thinking it necessary to introduce a sort of balance into their labors. And as I said, certain great men gave themselves monthly holidays on fixed days, while others divided every day into periods of leisure and work. I remember that this was the practice of the great orator Asinius Pollio, whom nothing kept at work after their 10th hour. After that time he would not even read his letters, in case something fresh cropped up to be dealt with, but in those 2 hours he would rid himself of the weariness of the whole day. Some take a break in the middle of the day and keep any less demanding task for the afternoon hours. Our ancestors also forbade any new motion to be introduced in the Senate after the 10th hour. The army divides the watches, and those who are returning from the expedition are exempt from night duty. We must indulge the mind from time to time, allow it the leisure which is its food and strength. We must go for walks out of doors, so that the mind can be strengthened and invigorated by a clear sky and plenty of fresh air. At times it will acquire fresh energy from a journey by carriage and a change of scene, or from socializing and drinking freely. Occasionally we should even come to the point of intoxication, sinking into drink but not being totally flooded by it, for it does wash away cares and stirs the mind to its depths, and heals sorrow just as it heals certain diseases. Liber was not named because he loosens the tongue, but because he liberates the mind from its slavery to cares, emancipates it, invigorates it, and emboldens it for all its undertakings. But there is a healthy moderation in wine, as in liberty. Solon and Arcesilaus are thought to have liked their wine, and Cato has been accused of drunkenness. Whoever accused him will more easily make the change honorable than Cato disgraceful. But we must not do this often, in case the mind acquires a bad habit. Yet at times it must be stimulated to rejoice without restraint, and austere soberness must be banished for a while. For whether we agree with the Greek poet that sometimes it is sweet to be mad, or with Plato that a man sound in mind knocks in vain at the doors of poetry, or with Aristotle that no great intellect has been without a touch of madness, only a mind that is deeply stirred can utter something noble and beyond the power of others. When it has scorned it every day in commonplace thoughts and risen aloft on the wings of divine inspiration, only then does it sound a note nobler than mortal voice could utter. As long as it remains in its senses, it cannot reach any lofty and difficult height. It must desert the usual track and race away, champing the bit and hurrying its driver in its course to a height it would have feared to scale by itself. So here you have, my dear Serenus, the means of preserving your tranquillity, the means of restoring it, and the means of resisting the falls that creep up on you unawares. But be sure of this, that none of them is strong enough for those who want to preserve such a fragile thing.